Is Joonas Korpisalo a fantasy option for the Boston Bruins? Maybe after last night's performance by Brandon Bussi, we're going to talk to Mike Amato of Sportsnet about all your Boston Bruins fantasy hockey options.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Friday, September 27th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Thank you to all those who tuned in to yesterday's episode with Andrew Raycroft. If you haven't checked that out yet, I highly recommend you do so. Very insightful commentary on the Jeremy Swayman contract situation, Tyler Johnson's PTO, and so much more. On today's podcast, I'm going to briefly go over the storylines from last night's loss to the New York Rangers, a preseason loss. Instead of going into the signs and stats, we'll also pivot to talking to Mike Amato of Sportsnet about some fantasy options for the Boston Bruins and around the NHL for those who are interested. So the Bruins lost last night 5-2 to the New York Rangers. They're now 1-2 in preseason action, which of course does not matter. There's no points on the board, but what is at stake is some spots on the roster. And the first big storyline from last night, I think, was the performance of Brandon Bussi. He allowed 4 goals in a 5-2 loss, an .875 save percentage, and of course, pending a resolution to the Jeremy Swayman contract dispute, he's kind of right now battling Michael DiPietro for the right to back up Joonas Korpisalo once the season begins. Hopefully, that's all taken care of, and we'll have Swayman and Korpisalo. Don't forget, there is the waiver wire consideration here, where both Korpisalo and Bussi have to be sent through waivers to be assigned to Providence. Do the Bruins risk losing Bussi on waivers to keep Korpisalo up, or do they send Korpisalo down for some AHL playing time as he looks to get back to NHL readiness? Although, as you heard Raycroft say yesterday, he's a very established and pretty good goaltender at the NHL level. And in the right system, he has shown, as he saw in LA a couple years ago. So it's most likely that Bussi would be sent down based on how he's performed so far in the preseason. Not sure how many teams will be clamoring for him, but that certainly is a consideration here. Plus, if they send Korpisalo down, they free up some cap space that perhaps they could use to sign a Tyler Johnson. Bussi said the Rangers did a good job of getting bodies in front of him, getting sticks on a lot of shots, redirecting them, credit them, but rebounds were the big thing tonight. Clean those up and you'll have an easier night in net. It is incumbent on the defense to clear those rebounds, but it's also incumbent on the goaltender not to give up so many juicy ones. And yes, the Bruins had some penalty issues. Nikita Zadorov was burned on the Oathman goal in his first game action for the Boston Bruins. But at the same time, you want your goalie to stand strong and put in the best possible performance. Giving up some juicy meatball rebounds is not necessarily going to do it. So there's some questions arising about Bussi's readiness to step in as the backup. I know a lot of people say, hey, Swayman's off, trade him, we got Korpisalo, Bussi's ready. It's really not that simple, and you need your best possible goaltending tandem in net, and right now that is Swayman and Korpisalo. On a positive side of things, we've talked about Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov, some younger players at the AHL level looking to make the jump at some point to the NHL. And a guy that's been playing very well over the past several weeks, dating back to the Prospects Challenge in Buffalo, is Brett Harrison. He scored off a nice pass from Morgan Geekie, holding the puck an extra split second before rifling a wrister past Jonathan Quick. He has emerged as a dark horse candidate out of training camp. It's a highly competitive field of forwards, of course, with Lysell, Merkulov competing with Tyler Johnson on the PTO, Morgan Geekie perhaps making his way into the top six, Matt Poitras coming back, Mark Kastelic looking to assert himself. We'll mention him in a moment. Riley Tufte has played very well. Cole Koepke. There's a bunch of guys who are shining right now. Trevor Kuntar is another one that I know a lot of people are high on. Max Jones has yet to make his Bruins debut. He's the guy that's penciled in to play on the fourth line. But Harrison is certainly warranting consideration as the next man up in the event of injury. The final storyline is the debut of Nikita Zadorov. He did have a costly turnover that led to that Brennan Othmann goal. Kind of got caught flat-footed, but he also was out there throwing the body around. He, along with Mark Kastelic, really had that physical presence last night, and you can tell why the Bruins targeted these two guys with the view to having them being much harder to play against. We can forgive Zadorov for perhaps not being at the very top of his game, being his Bruins debut. He did dish out some punishment. It can't come at the detriment of his play in the defensive zone. Again, first game in black and gold, first preseason game for him. We can give guys a mulligan in those situations as they shake off the rust after a long offseason. So not the greatest night for Brandon Bussi. There's some questions there arising. Kastelic looks like he should be a mainstay in the bottom six, the fourth line. Brett Harrison shining in a depth role as a young guy looking to make a strong impression, as is Trevor Kuntar. So those are some of the storylines from last night's game against the New York Rangers. Up next is a preseason game in Philadelphia against the Flyers, a Flyers team that looks pretty entertaining so far with the addition of Matvei Michkov. Maybe he's a fantasy sleeper in your league, and we'll discuss that here coming up with Mike Amato of Sportsnet. On Monday's episode, we will, of course, recap Saturday's game against the Philadelphia Flyers. 4 games remaining on the preseason schedule, including a home-and-home with Philadelphia one Saturday, and then they play next Tuesday. So we're getting into the later stages here. You're going to see more regulars in the lineup. We saw Pastrnak, Zacha in the lineup last night. And yeah, some rust on those guys as well. Matt Poitras stepping in for an injured Elias Lindholm on that line. He continued to play extremely well and looking like David Krejci 2.0 out there. I think he is a lock to make the lineup. Anyways, that's it for the recap from last night's game. We'll discuss fantasy options coming up here with Mike Amato of Sportsnet as the podcast continues. We are driven by the search for better. And when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. It's to match. And you can do that most effectively with Indeed. Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Boston Bruins. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Get that $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need. I absolutely love going to concerts, hockey games, baseball games. In fact, I'm planning my next concert outing for the night before my birthday, December 1st, which is going to be the Arkells in Kitchener. And I'm checking Gametime every day to get the best possible tickets at the right price. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I love the view from your seat. You know exactly what to expect when you arrive at the venue, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. What time is it? It's game time. Download Gametime today for the best possible seats for your next concert or I'm pleased to be joined on the podcast once again by Mike Amato of Sportsnet. He is an old colleague of mine from the Score days and someone that I bother probably way too often with fantasy hockey questions. I actually got one for you before we leave today, but thanks for taking some time to chat, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm a little nervous because I saw you had Andrew Raycroft on the other day, so that's it's a tough act to follow. A bit of a downgrade to me, but let's see what we can do.
Fantasy option back in the day, I guess. Calder Trophy winner.
That's right.
Let's start talking about goaltending. Obviously, the big story for a lot of Bruins fans and fantasy owners is the absence of Jeremy Swayman at training camp. A lot of people, including myself in one keeper league, banking on a big season from Swayman as the starter. Brandon Bussi, I mean, if you're in a deep keeper league, maybe you have him. Joonas Korpisalo would be the next man up. If people are drafting today and thinking he might start opening night, how much confidence should you have in him rolling him out as your fantasy goalie?
I'm mildly optimistic with Korpisalo. I'm more confident in the Bruins as a whole, like their defensive structure and their kind of history of rotating goalies. Like even if Swayman was back, I wouldn't really hate Korpisalo as like my third fantasy goalie because I have a feeling he's still going to play once a week on a pretty good defensive team. You know, he's going to get probably wins. And we've seen Korpisalo when he was with LA, who's another good defensive team, kind of be pretty serviceable. So I kind of liked him already. Obviously, if Swayman's out for a while, he becomes even more valuable. It's kind of Swayman and Thatcher Demko are kind of the two big dominoes. And I think the whole goalie landscape for fantasy this year, because they could be back pretty soon, or it sounds like it could be a while. I thought, I didn't think Swayman was going to get to this point personally. I mean, you're a lot closer to the team, so you might have some better ideas. But when I heard Don Sweeney talking the other day, and I heard someone talking about December 1st as the deadline, I was like, wow, that's because I remember, here when Nylander held out until December 1st, that was a tough one. And I think the other thing to think about too is like if Swayman, let's say he comes back, even if he comes back in like November, he's missed all of camp. It's probably going to take him a few weeks to ramp up. I would imagine a goalie, it's probably trickier to get into a rhythm than a skater. So yeah, it's not ideal. If you're keeping Swayman now, if you haven't drafted yet, you'd probably push him down your board a little bit, but still a lot of reward if he does, resign and come back pretty soon. Yeah,
speaking of deadlines, like head coach Jim Montgomery said he likes to play kind of his projected starters in the later stages of the preseason.
Yeah.
The Bruins have played 3 games. They got 4 left. So you think by like Monday or Tuesday is when you'd want to have him back to have those appearances in those games. So it's really getting to the timeline for starting the season on time, but certainly December 1st. Yeah. That going 2 months with Korpisalo and Bussi. I don't know if that would put them in a pretty big hole to dig out of, which is unfortunate, but that's the way it is, I guess. In terms of, let's talk about Bruins mainstays. Obviously, you're looking at David Pastrnak as a first-round pick in most fantasy drafts. After that, it kind of gets maybe to the mid-rounds. What's your take on, let's start with the forwards, just Brad Marchand, if he still has high-end production left, maybe Lindholm as well as the presumed center for the Pastrnak-Pavel Zacha line.
Yeah, I really like Pastrnak a lot. I had him ranked 6 overall in my top 250 players. So just obviously his goal scoring point totals, and obviously he's one of the league's like highest volume shooters. He averages close to 400 shots the last couple of years. Like that's crazy high numbers. So if you're in a points league, Pasternak's huge. I even think you could argue, he could even be in your top 5 depending on the format. If you think like somebody like maybe Kucherov's going to regress a little bit this year, maybe, or, I know Draisaitl had like a down year last year. Obviously Austin Matthews, a lot more valuable in leagues that, have a higher emphasis on goals, but his point totals might not be as high. So yeah, Pastrnak to me is a borderline top 5 pick, if not just outside it. Really great. Marchand, I'm like more 5th, 6th round, maybe. Still really good production. He looks like he's a guy that like, last year it sounded like he actually was playing with quite a few injuries, but still had a really productive season. Like he looks like someone that's going to age well from a fantasy standpoint. So that's really good to see. But yeah, you mentioned Lindholm. I think Lindholm to me is probably like maybe the biggest one of the biggest sleepers out there. Like I think obviously he's coming off a bit of a down year, but playing with Pastrnak, probably the best winger he's ever played with. A lot of upside. I'm assuming they're going to move Zacha full-time to wing now.
Looks like that's the plan.
Yeah, I would think so. He's pretty serviceable maybe on that left side. And I imagine too, like late in games, maybe they stack it and go Pastrnak, Marchand, with Lindholm. Sometimes if they're behind here and there. So that's, a bit of an advantage too for Lindholm. He'll probably get some minutes like that. So, I always look at guys that kind of have down years or were injured and they get kind of forgotten about. And I think Lindholm's maybe one of those. With a change of scenery might help. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple other guys too, like Charlie Coyle, I think had 60 points last year. Pretty serviceable, especially if you're in a league with face-off wins and hits. He's a pretty versatile guy, and he'll probably be the second line center, I would think. There.
Yeah, he'll probably be lining up with Marchand, and then there's kind of a question mark on the right side. I was going to ask you about. I'm in a keeper league that has a salary cap, so we value those entry level contracts a lot. Do you think a guy like Fabian Lysell is ready? What's your take on him, kind of fantasy wise, as a keeper or a guy who could contribute this season?
Yeah, he'd be interesting if he gets a shot. I think for me, if he's in the top 6, I like his kind of upside there. Pretty much, I think almost anyone in the Bruins top 6 is probably rosterable in most leagues. Because I was even going to mention, like, I picked up Morgan Geekie off waivers last year for a while. He was pretty good for hits and penalty minutes, and he scored, here and there. He got some top power play time too, which was interesting. So he's another kind of versatile guy. But yeah, like Lysell. Obviously, the Bruins have had a lot of turnover at forward, different guys coming in. So I think maybe they're going to give some younger players a chance. So yeah, anyone that is going to be attached to like Marchand or Pastrnak, probably good to look at.
Cool. Let's pivot to the defenseman here coming up after the break. NHL season is right around the corner, and NFL is obviously fully underway. And FanDuel is giving you a big opportunity for a return Right now, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All you have to do is go to FanDuel and, for example, look up the over-under for Bruins individual points or team points. I believe it's set at 97.5. Put $5 down on that, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. When you're watching games too, you get a hunch in the middle of a game. You can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we're back here with Mike Amato of Sportsnet to talk some Bruins and general fantasy stuff. One guy that I'm really interested in is Charlie McAvoy. He's one of those players that their effectiveness on the ice doesn't necessarily translate to fantasy hockey. I think his lack of kind of those elite level point totals as a defenseman probably keeps him out of those serious Norris Trophy conversations. What's your take on McAvoy as where he would fit in on your team's fantasy? Is he like a number one guy you need to get? Maybe a number 2 or 3? What's your take on McAvoy there?
Yeah, I think you described it pretty well. He's like one of the assistant captains on my way better in real life team than in fantasy hockey. I have like a whole list of these guys.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you'd want Charlie McAvoy all day on your favorite NHL team, you'd want him if you're trying to win a Stanley Cup. But if fantasy, he's not bad. But I think he has like this good name recognition because he's such a good defenseman that he gets probably overvalued in fantasy. I think how you said a number 2 or 3 is probably where I'd look at him. He's never scored 60 points, only topped 50 twice, I think.
Right.
Pretty low shot volume too for a guy that plays as much as he does and gets as much power play time as he does. But again, if you're in a league with hits and blocks, maybe he's closer to a 1 because he is pretty effective there. But yeah, he just doesn't have the shot volume and the point totals like some other guys. I kind of put like Miro Heiskanen in that category too. Another like just great defenseman, but like what he does on the ice just doesn't always translate to fantasy. Had that one big offensive season, but everything else is kind of, just average. So there's a lot of guys like that. And that's probably like, not to get on a tangent, but when you're playing fantasy hockey, it's probably the one thing, you need to, if you want to have success, is kind of figure out like the difference between guys that are valuable, in the actual NHL and in fantasy, because there is like a subtle difference to like some of the guys, in the middle rounds and the later rounds that you'll pick.
Sure. Yeah, I know in the one league I'm in, that's a cap league. There it's just full of highly paid defensemen that have great name recognition, but just don't. It's not the way they don't fill up the stat sheet. Just isn't worth the investment. But obviously, it's different when it comes to on ice and suppression of shots and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a couple other guys Nikita Zadorov is a little interesting if you're in a deep league with hits and penalty minutes, because he can fill up those categories for sure. One of the more disappointing guys for me last year was Elias Lindholm. 2 years ago, he had a great season. Everyone was grabbing him, and last year he wasn't really fantasy relevant too much. So I'm kind of interested to see where he goes this year. If he's more of like a bounce back guy, or I think he took a little bit of advantage of. I think McAvoy was out for a bit 2 years ago. He got a little more power play time, a little more minutes early in the season, which I think helped his numbers. So I kind of think he's probably a guy you don't draft and just kind of keep an eye on him on the waiver wire in case he pops or something.
Right. My other question about the Bruins defense, possible sleeper. Again, in the cap league, I've got him as a low cost guy. Mason Lohrei, do you see him having any fantasy contributions this season?
It's possible. I think maybe it might take like an injury somewhere on the Bruins, where he gets pushed up a little bit, gets a few more minutes. I watched him a bit in the series against the Leafs last year. I thought he had a lot of potential. So yeah, it could be a guy down the line. If you're in a keeper situation, maybe it's somebody you're kind of stashing and seeing. But in 1 year leagues, I'd probably just wait and see if how his minutes kind of look earlier in the year.
Right. All right, that's I think pretty much covers the Bruins. To finish here, I'm wondering if you can give me, let's say, one player at each position off the radar that, as a sleeper, if they really pop, could win people their fantasy leagues. You have a forward, a defenseman, and a goalie.
Yeah, I will start in net. So I'll say two guys. So number one, I think Darcy Kemper could be really valuable this year. Again, kind of forgotten about in Washington the last couple of years, injuries, inconsistency, but now he's going to the Kings, who, I talked a little bit earlier in the show about how good the Bruins and Kings are at kind of propping up goalies. And I think whether it's been like Korpisalo or Cam Talbot or David Riddick or Phoenix Copley, the Kings have like propped up a lot of goalies in the last couple of years. And I think Kemper might be better than all of them and might be able to play like 50 plus games. So he's the guy I'm looking at. And I'll give you two more kind of like backups that I could see playing a fair bit. Like one is Anthony Stolarz in Toronto. I think he was really good last year. And, Joseph Woll's had a tough time staying healthy. So I wonder if there's a situation where Stolarz is kind of thrust into playing for a couple months as a starter. And, Toronto's a pretty good regular season team. He's going to have some good numbers. And I kind of like Spencer Knight. I just think with two deep playoff runs for the Panthers, I think they might try to rest Bobrovsky a little bit more this year. And, Knight's got a pretty big contract. I think they're going to probably want to play him a little bit. So Panthers, I think, might be, or were last year maybe the best defensive team in the league. So that always helps a goalie. So those are guys I'd look at in net.
Nice.
Defense wise, so I'll go back to the Kings. Obviously, we just saw Doughty. Doughty go down. So I feel like either Brant Clark or maybe Jordan Spence is going to get some quite a bit of power play one time in the first at least month or two. I don't exactly know what the injury to Doughty is, but it looks like he's going to miss some time.
Like an ankle, something pretty bad. Doesn't sound good.
So those are a couple of guys that may not have been drafted in your 1 year league that might end up getting some big minutes, big power play time early in the season. Another guy I like too is Zach Werenski. He scored double-digit goals, I think, in like 6 of his 8 seasons. Just if he can stay healthy, he's always got really strong numbers.
For sure.
Yeah, so I like him. I like him as a fit there. Forwards a little trickier. It's hard to find sleeper. I think a couple guys that might break out. One guy I really like is Quentin Byfield. Again, going back to the Kings, I've been talking about.
All over the Kings.
I would say I was going to say Wyatt Johnson, but I don't feel like he's a sleeper anymore. I've been talking to people and everyone's saying he's going like way earlier than they thought in drafts.
Drafted one spot after Lysell.
Wow. Yeah. So, he's a guy. I'll give one more like sleeper name, and I think this guy could have some value, is Anthony Duclair. I think Wall likes him, and I think he's going to get a chance to play with Horvat and Barzal.
Yeah, that line looks pretty good so far.
Yeah, so he's a guy that you might be able to get pretty late in your drafts.
Perfect. Yeah, I actually have a few of those names on some of my teams. I got Spencer Knight. Been waiting on him for a while to make his arrival. So that should be interesting. I don't know if they have the highest combined cap hit among their two goalies. I would expect that
they must. Yeah, like they must.
$1.5 million. So they'll want to get him going for sure.
Yeah.
Mike, I can't thank you enough for taking some time to chat. Let people know where they can find your hockey coverage and your fantasy hockey coverage as well.
Yeah, so every Sunday during the season, I'll have 20 fantasy thoughts on sportsnet.ca, and Fridays I'll have a column on Sportsnet as well. And we also have a Sleepers and Keepers fantasy hockey podcast on the Hockey News. You can check out wherever you get your pods. And just follow me on Twitter/X at Amato_Mike.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Mike. And we'll probably check in again at some point throughout the season.
Sounds good, Ian. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much again to Mike Amato for jumping on the podcast. Great fantasy hockey mind and also just a great dude. Please do subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins if you have not already. Go back and listen to yesterday's Andrew Raycroft episode. And on Monday, you can expect a roundtable episode featuring the playoff teams from last year, Locked On hosts from the Leafs, Lightning, Panthers, and myself. I won't be doing actually a regular podcast since it is a holiday up here in Canada. I'm going to take advantage of that. Anyways, thanks again for listening. Once again, friends, please do take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a great weekend. Peace.